what I do for hive beetles is I make sure I don't leave any comb on the ground when I'm working my bees. Always make sure your comb is taken away where it can't breed hive beetles. And remember, their larva has to go into the ground to pupate. So I take my combs and I put them in a solar melter, and if you don't have a solar melter, I don't know what to tell you, because you really need one. It's a real problem having all these combs laying around without melting them. It's real easy to use. So that's a solar melter, one of the first lines of defense against hive beetles, in my opinion. Another thing is screen bottom boards, in my opinion, because the bottom board, if it's solid, it accumulates debris. Even if you do lean it forward, it accumulates debris. And I've noticed a lot of times the hive beetle larvae would be living on the solid bottom board, eating the debris, and the bees wouldn't be bothering them, and they would go ahead and mature there, even in a very crowded hive. But with the screen bottom board, they have no ability to accumulate any debris. But during the season, when the hive beetles are out, which is summertime when it's hot, you don't have your mite trays in the bottom of your screen bottom boards, so there is no way they could accumulate any debris, because it would fall out into the ground. And I don't keep my mite trays in because they do accumulate debris under them. I only keep them in the winter time. And I have a mat underneath my beehives, as you can see, these blue mat. I always try to keep mats under my beehives so that when the hive beetle larvae wiggle out and get ready to pupate, they can't hit the ground very easily. And I make sure there's a large number of lizards around my hives. Let's see if I can find any lizards on this tree. I've even stocked lizards. I keep lizards around. There's one, a little lizard. I keep a lot of lizards around my hives because they're important. They love hive beetle larvae, and they especially like the beetles. And they're active all the time, lurking around looking for tiny little larvae to eat. Of course, they don't like to eat bees because they don't like being stung. And I don't know if you saw that little lizard, but they're usually sunning themselves on the hives. But the mat on the bottom makes a big difference. And then another thing, one time I got from Southeastern Insectaries some nematodes which live in the soil, and they're predatory nematodes. They attack hive beetle larvae as soon as they get into the ground. And since then I haven't had any problem with hive beetles, but I did have some hive beetle problems after I was sprayed from pesticides big time, a long time ago, maybe several years ago. That was the end of my hive beetle problem there. Once I got the insecticide stopped lately, I haven't had it for a couple of years now. There was 1 or 2 sprays last year, but he was doing it 2 to 3 times a week. People were giving him spray. Now this little black thing right here, that's called a beetle barn. You can see it in the entrance. Now what's in there is fipronil, which in Australia is legal to put in your beehives. It's something we use in the United States in our restaurants, and to keep it's legal to put it in restaurants around food, as long as it doesn't come in contact with the food inside of an enclosed trap like that. But it doesn't harm the bees as long as it stays in the trap. And you got to be careful with any hive insecticides, whatever they are, because if they're contact insecticides, such as boric acid or diatomaceous earth, that means they are slow kill, and they're going to walk. The hive beetle's going to walk around the hive and infect the entire colony of bees too. You want something that's not contact. One is that's an ingested type. If they eat them and they die, that makes it safe because it's not going to be rubbing up against the bees. I would never use diatomaceous earth because I found that to be extremely slow kill and very ineffective. They walk around the hive and they track it everywhere, and of course it affects the bees just like it does the beetles, and it's totally ineffective anyway. The bees have a softer chitin than the beetle does, so it's going to affect the bees quicker. Diatomaceous earth doesn't even work for fleas or anything like that. When I've used it, I quit using it on everything. But when it comes to these little small nukes, just make sure that you keep the bottoms clean. You might have to take them apart every now and then, keep the bottoms clean. Make sure and get a bucket with water and just dump the debris into the bucket, and of course it's going to make sure that they drown. And then keep a nice ant hill around, and then when they're finished, just throw them on top of a little ant hill and let the ants eat the dead. It works out really good. And see, the bees do a good job of cleaning out the empty brood and all that. And here's one of these things. They do a great job of cleaning their hives. They sort of have some genetics towards getting rid of the hive beetle. I've learned this. Some of my bees have no hive beetles ever, and some of them get them. This one here has really good genetics. It never has any hive beetles. So I bred from it. Done really good with it. The nematodes are something that I would certainly get right away if I had any apiaries. And the number one thing is to keep your apiaries together. Don't have them spread all over the place like I used to have them. Try to keep each apiary together. I have no problems with drifting, even though they're side by side and they're all painted pretty much the same colors. I got to camouflage my beehive colors because people could get jealous and spray them, which they do. You'll see that problem. I recommend that you keep them together because that way you can put your nematodes in one spot. If you get the nematodes, make sure you don't mix them with tap water. Get some distilled water from the store and mix them up. And you put them in like a 2-quart pitcher. Try to do it in the evening and spread them in front of your hives where the hive beetle is going to wiggle out. Its larvae is going to wiggle out into the ground. That way there's no reproduction. And then you might have a hive get infested, but when they wiggle out, they won't be making more beetles. Because what happens is if one hive gets infested and they wiggle out and they reproduce underground, they become new beetles and they'll overwhelm the rest of your colonies. You don't want any of your colonies to get infested and then be able to pupate underground and become beetles. That's the problem. If they infest a hive and they fall to the ground and they can't pupate because of the nematode, then you're still all right. So that works very well. Anyway, I have one major thing is if you got some solid bottom boards, just make sure they're leaning forward because you sure don't want any puddling going on in the back from rain, and debris needs to fall out the front fast. But I don't have that problem. What I love about screen bottom board is I can have them lean in any which way they want to lean, and there's never going to be any problem with that. Another thing is a lot of empty comb, especially drone combs, really harbor the hive beetles, and they make it hard for the bees to keep them out. I'm foundationless because I don't like to have a lot of comb that isn't used because I think that's more of a beetle factory. But I've got my beetles under control. But of course it would be quickly into big trouble again if my neighbor who drives down here a few miles and sprays that hayfield he bought across from me. He's a real spray nut. If he sprays and I have a pesticide damage, of course I'm going to have hive beetles again because they're going to smell the dead bees and they're going to come up because they're scavengers. They were one scavenger that can overwhelm its host. Anyway, I don't know what else to tell you about hive beetles that I can think of. Except that you can reuse the equipment after hive beetles. Just leave it out in the sunshine and it'll bake it and get it nice again. Scrape it good with your hive tool. That works. Remember one thing important, if you use the Australian method of fipronil, make sure that if you get a bait gel, make sure that gel is not a contact poison. Some of the super good roach poisons are contact poisons as well. You don't want that, because you sure don't want one of the beetles getting out of the trap and then walking through the hive and getting that, getting everybody involved. The ingested only kind works because they have to eat it, and your bees aren't going to eat that nasty stuff. They're not going to eat it. No way. And that works. So that's all I know. If you have any questions that I can help you with, I'd be glad to tell you what I can tell you. I've been doing these bees since like when I was a little kid. Now I'm 54, maybe 55, I don't know. I've seen all the pests come in my time, and I've learned to deal with them all. And I've lived in many parts of the country, and I know all about these bees, and I know they're all the same. They're all the same. No matter what they call them, they're all the same. All types of bees propolize. They all get dangerous when they're queenless. If you don't smoke them, they all get extremely aggressive if they're a big hive. There's no such thing as one type of bee that propolizes and one type of bee that swarms and one type of bee that's aggressive. They're all Apis mellifera, and they're only different colors of the fur on their bodies. There's nothing else different about them. And size, I used to say the African bee was smaller. It is not smaller. It's just a Apis mellifera bee, but they used to measure its comb size and say it's Africanized because they didn't even understand that foundation kept bees are larger than the ones that are raised on their own comb. I've got all small cell bees because mine raise their own comb. So mine would all test to be, you know, we won't talk about that because I don't want them doing this, what they did to me in Texas. Anyway. This is a video to try to help everybody that I can with every information I can to help them with the hive beetle, because the hive beetle is a real problem. It will affect even the strongest colonies if they're overwhelmed by a bunch of mature beetles getting in. You're always going to get beetles flying into your hives. They go right in the entrance, and it doesn't matter if you have a solid bottom board or a screen bottom board, they're going to get in all the time. The problem is you got to learn how to deal with them so they don't overwhelm your hives. You're only going to have this problem where it gets really hot and stays hot a long time. They don't like cold weather. They do overwinter in zone 7, but they don't start breeding and laying eggs until the weather gets in the 90s, or the 80s, excuse me. It hasn't been in the 90s here, but they're already starting. I already had to clean a few beetles out of a couple of nukes over there that are brand new, but that's because the solid bottom boards had accumulated a bunch of dead bees and stuff from my manipulations. That's all. Hope it wasn't too long-winded. Bye-bye.